One of the most daunting challenges that a prospective gun buyer faces, especially when they're new to the game, is what firearm should they purchase. And there is a bewildering array of guns out there, and if you don't know what you're looking for, it can be really difficult to decide what you should spend your money on. That's compounded by the fact that when you go into the gun store, the salesperson will have an agenda. They obviously want to sell you a gun. Are they really that concerned about getting you into the best gun for you? And unfortunately, the answer is very often they aren't. Surprisingly, you think you go into a gun store and the salesperson is well knowledgeable about firearms, but that's often not the case. As a matter of fact, they may have misunderstandings about firearms, and there may be incentives for them to sell you a particular firearm because they get an extra $20 if they sell this gun or that gun. So you need to be aware of that the salesperson may not have your best interests at heart. So you need to go into the gun store with a little bit of knowledge beforehand so you can become a more informed consumer. Now, one of the first things you need to ask yourself, and a good salesperson will ask you these same questions, is, what's the gun for? That's the very first question we have to ask when we're deciding what kind of gun to get. You know, are you going to be shooting, pheasants out in a field, or are you going to be carrying a firearm for self-defense? Those are widely different things. They both involve firearms, but the guns are at opposite ends of the spectrum. And while one gun may be good for one of those activities, it won't be good for the other. So what is the gun for? Is it for home protection? Is it to be carried? Now, both of those are self-defense things, but if the gun is going to stay at home, it's a different thing than if the gun is going to be carried on your body. And those are considerations that need to be taken into thought also. So first off, decide what the gun's for. And I'm going to assume in this video that your gun is going to be for self-defense, and you're looking for a handgun for self-defense. Now, when we're talking about handguns, there's two basic categories. There's the semi-automatic pistol, which is loaded by a magazine and will operate itself through a slide moving back and forth. Or it may be a revolver, which is manually operated by a trigger pull. There's pluses and minuses for both of those types of firearms. Revolvers tend to be a little bit more simple to operate. You open a cylinder very easily. You can immediately see whether it's loaded or not. If you want to load it, fill the chambers, you close it up, and you're done. Pull the trigger, the gun fires. So it's very simple to operate, very easy to understand. It doesn't require an awful lot of training to operate it. The downside is the trigger pull can be kind of heavy, very often 10 or 12 pounds. And if you don't have a lot of grip strength, you may not be able to operate the trigger pull. Also, on a lot of these revolvers, the trigger reach, which is the distance from the back strap here to the front of the trigger, can be a little bit long. And we'll talk about that in another video. And the gun may not fit you well, depending on the size of your hand. People say that revolvers are very reliable, and in my experience, yeah, they're as reliable as a semi-automatic pistol. I don't find that today that there's really any difference between them. I've had revolvers jam on me, and when they do jam, they jam very badly, and getting them back into operation is not a matter of seconds, but a matter of minutes. Some of the things I've seen happen is mainsprings break. I've seen revolvers, the cylinders fail to turn. I've seen the ejector rod unscrew itself during firing, so you can't open the cylinder. So those are some of the things I've seen in revolvers that have jammed them up and preventing them from firing. The semi-automatic pistol is a very popular choice. I'd say the majority of pistols that are being sold in America today are semi-automatics. The advantages are they're magazine fed, so that they tend to hold more cartridges. The revolver will generally be from 5 commonly 6 and up to 7 rounds, sometimes 8 or 9 depending on the revolver, but the ammunition on the revolver is kind of limited. The semi-automatic will hold more. The bottom line of that is going to be 6 or 7 for a smaller semi-automatic pistol on up to 17, 18, even 20 rounds in a magazine. And the magazines are very easy to replace, so its reloading is very quick. Semi-automatic pistols tend to be a little bit more ergonomic. They fit the hand a little bit better. And depending on the model, the trigger pull will generally be a little bit better, and that will make it easier to shoot well. Now that we know that there's 2 basic types of firearms as far as pistols, we've got revolvers and we've got semi-automatic pistols, the next thing we need to look at is the way the trigger operates. Now that we know that there's 2 basic types of handguns, the semi-automatic and the revolver, we also have to know that there are a few different ways that they operate. You may have heard the term single action or double action, and that refers to the way the trigger operates. So there's single action, there's double action only. And there's also double action and single action together in the same gun. And that's an important thing for you to know because they operate differently, and that may or may not be what you're looking for. Once again, those terms refer to what the trigger does. So if we look at a single action pistol, in this particular case I've got a Colt 1911, single action refers to what the trigger does. So you can see the hammer is in the lowered position here, and pulling on the trigger does nothing. The hammer has to be in the cocked position. Now the trigger will operate, and the trigger has a single action. The single action is that it releases the hammer, and that's all the trigger does. Now in this semi-automatic pistol, once you fire the gun, the slide will go back and cock the hammer, and then you're ready to have the trigger do its single action of dropping the hammer again, releasing the hammer. Now the advantages of this are that the trigger pull is very short and light, typically 4 pounds or thereabouts, and so shooting the gun is very easy. It doesn't require a lot of pressure to make the gun fire. The disadvantage is that the gun must be cocked first. So you have to decide on whether you're going to carry the gun with the hammer cocked and around in the chamber and the safety on, which is called cocked and locked. You may have heard that term before, which requires that before you shoot the gun you have to disengage the safety and then you can fire it. So once again, the safety would be on, cocked and locked. To fire it, you'd have to disengage the safety and then you can pull the trigger. Or some people will carry this in what's called condition 3, where the magazine is full but the chamber is empty, and before we can fire the gun we have to load it and then we can fire it. Just as in the semi-automatic pistol, there's single action revolvers. So this design goes back to the early 1800s, and once again, if the hammer is down, pulling the trigger does nothing. The hammer has to be cocked, and then the trigger will perform its single action of releasing the hammer. Pulling the trigger does nothing until the hammer is cocked. This is an older style, older system, and you don't see it an awful lot anymore. Around the end of the 1800s, they developed a double action trigger. And what the double action trigger does is it performs 2 actions. Pulling the trigger cocks the hammer and then releases it. So we've got 2 things going on. The trigger cocks the hammer and releases it. The advantage of this is I can keep the gun with hammer down in a safe condition, and it will take a very long, deliberate pull of the trigger to get the gun to fire. So the chances of me firing this gun accidentally or unintentionally because I got excited and pulled an easy-to-pull trigger are much less on this type of firearm. Now, this type of gun also has a single action feature where the hammer can be cocked. You can see what that did to the trigger. The trigger is now way back there. Now with the hammer cocked, it only takes a pound or two of pressure and a very short travel to perform the single action of releasing the hammer. So if you need to make a precise shot, you can cock the hammer and then not have much trigger pull. The disadvantage of you doing this is that you've put the gun kind of in a hair trigger situation where it's very easy for it to go off. And let's say you hear a noise in the night and you think, oh, I need to get my gun ready, and you cock the hammer, and then for some reason, it's the neighbor's dog and you don't need to shoot. Now what do? I've got a very dangerous situation, and that requires lowering the hammer, and the way to lower the hammer is by pulling the trigger, and that can result in an accident. You go into any gun store, and I'm sure they'll tell you of horror stories of somebody bringing in a pistol like this. Generally, they point it at you and say, "I cocked the hammer last night, and I can't make it go forward," and that can be an issue. So, if you're going to have something like this, oh, revolvers are very simple. Yeah, until this happens, and now what do I do with it? And you have to realize you keep the gun pointed in a safe direction, control the hammer, then release the trigger and ease it forward. This also applies to semi-automatic pistols where they have put a double action trigger into it, and so that pulling the trigger cocks the hammer and releases it. Pulling the trigger cocks the hammer and releases it. It gives you the same functionality as the revolver, where I have a long, deliberate trigger pull. The gun is safe with the hammer lowered, and so an accident is less likely to happen. That's the theory. In reality, it's really no more safe or dangerous than any other firearm. Now, being that it's semi-automatic, when you fire that first long trigger pull, the slide is going to actuate, cocking the hammer, and if you look at the position of the trigger, it's now back, and the gun has gone from double action into what's called single action, and I now have a short trigger pull and a cocked hammer. So my first shot was a long, heavy trigger pull. My second shot is now a shorter, lighter trigger pull. That can be a little confusing, and I can tell you there's been times in training that I've inadvertently fired a second shot when I didn't mean to, because I started staging the trigger and I put a little more pressure on it than I wanted to. That's under training. What would happen if it was a dynamic situation and things were really stressful? Also, another thing we need to consider is oh, I fired the gun, and I'm practicing whatever, and I need to put it in the holster now. Well, I've got a cocked pistol. I need to do something with that. So most of these guns are designed with a decocker on them, and lowering this lever safely lowers the hammer and blocks it from hitting the firing pin. So let's say you're going to load the pistol. We put in a fresh magazine. We run the slide, and the hammer is now back. We have to remember, before we put it in our holster, before we put it wherever it's going to go, we have to remember to decock the pistol. And then the question is, what do we do with the decocking lever if it's in a safety like this sort of system? Because now, with that lever down, the gun won't fire. And I had a student that was involved in a shooting. Unfortunately, he didn't get to do any shooting because his pistol that he insisted have a safety. For some reason, the safety was on. I don't know if he turned it on purposely or if it got put on accidentally, but he got shot at, and he drew his pistol and tried to fire it, and nothing happened. He racked the slide, kicked out a perfectly good cartridge, and still nothing would happen, and it was because the safety was on, and in the excitement of the situation, he couldn't figure that out. So he got shot several times. He did survive, but he never got a shot off at the bad guy. So you have to decide, what am I going to do with this? Now, I've loaded the pistol, I've racked the slide, the hammer's back. Well, I can decock it, obviously. Do I leave the lever down, leave the lever up? I prefer to leave it down and just get used to always turning it off as you draw the pistol and present it to the target. So coming out to the target, my thumb turns the safety off, and I shoot. When I come back, I put the safety back on. So that's a training thing. So this is a lot more complicated than I think we need to be, in that, you know, there's a lot of stuff going on. Whether, you know, I need to remember to decock the hammer. I need to think about where the safety is going to be carried. I need to train myself to turn it on and off. Not a bad system, but this was developed in the 1920s, and we've come a ways from there. So I think there's better things out there. Good, reliable guns, but more complicated than they need to be. Around the 1970s or 80s, double-action only pistols became popular. There was examples available before that, but they became more popular in that time period. And double-action only pistols are pistols that the only way they can function is through a long, steady trigger pull. This came about because of liability issues, and generally because of law enforcement agencies, where they didn't want their officers inadvertently firing rounds because of short trigger pulls that resulted in, or were the result of a slide cocking a hammer, and then they forget to decock it. So a double action system, the trigger always cocks the hammer and releases it. So even though this pistol has a hammer, when the slide operates, the hammer follows it back down. So it does not stay cocked. So each trigger pull is long and deliberate. Now I prefer this system because it's simpler. Yeah, you have a long trigger pull, which some people like because you're less likely to pull the trigger accidentally, but the trigger pull is the same first shot, second shot, all the way through to the end. So there's no surprises, there's nothing unusual. Also, these pistols tend to be very simple, so you see there's no safety lever here. The safety is the long trigger pull. Now, of course, these are all drop safe. They have things that prevent the firing pin from hitting the cartridge unless the trigger is pulled to the rearward position. So it doesn't really need any external safeties. The long trigger pull is the external safety. So in the excitement of being attacked, all I have to do is get it in my hand, point it at the bad guy, pull the trigger, we're good to go. Some revolvers were made that way also. So this is Smith & Wesson's Centennial, and you can see that there's no exposed hammer. There is an internal hammer, but it's hidden. And so the only way this gun will fire is with a long, deliberate trigger pull. Now, you can't see the hammer because it's inside, but there's a hammer being cocked and then released. So every trigger pull is exactly the same. Long, smooth, deliberate. And I can't put myself into that hair trigger situation that I can with this revolver of having the hammer back. And then the latest development in firearms is this double action only. And your most common system of that type is going to be the Glock. Now, this is the end result of the evolution of pistols, is the polymer frame or plastic frame pistol, and Glock kind of made it popular. Now we have the Smith & Wesson M&P and the Shield. We have the Springfield XD series, and any number of other firearms are now made with a plastic frame and and they're called striker fired. So there's no hammer on this gun. There's just a large firing pin. And the operating systems will vary slightly internally, but you don't really need to worry about that. What you need to think about is that it's a very simple design with no external safeties. It's drop safe. It will not fire unless the trigger gets pulled. So to operate the gun, you load a magazine, insert it, run the slide. I don't have to worry about any external safeties. It's safe right now. It will not fire unless the trigger gets pulled. And as any other double action only gun, the trigger pull is going to be the same for each shot. There'll be no surprises. So that's the basics of double action, single action, and double action only. Both revolvers and semi-automatics have both of those features, or can come in those features. Single action only does one thing. It drops a cocked hammer. Double action, the trigger cocks the hammer and then releases it. And many of those guns also can do single action. So you call them double action, single action, or DA/SA. And then there's double action only. And that's what I consider to be the best choice for self-defense, because it's the simplest. And in a dynamic life or death situation, simple is best. I'm Peter Burlingame, Self-Defense Initiative. Thanks for watching. Be safe out there.